the themes of this storming are very Trumpian, are very election denial-y, as we saw in the United States, and the people directly involved in the process in America were directly voicing their support and even directly involving themselves in the election denialism in Brazil. The thing that really gets me about this is not only the fact that, you know, it's very bad to see people storm the Brazilian Congress and Supreme Court. Okay, before I get into that, I should just say what happened. So, yesterday, Bolsonaro supporters stormed the Brazilian Congress, Presidential Palace, and I believe Supreme Court as well, because they were angry that Bolsonaro lost the presidential elections to socialist Lula da Silva. And they, I guess, believed that by storming the Capitol, they would be delivering like a powerful statement towards the government, or maybe they'd be able to hold on to these buildings and bring Bolsonaro back to power. Of course, this didn't work. And honestly, if I'm being for real with you guys, these guys are probably even dumber than the January 6th protesters. I actually have a segment here which also talks about hundreds of them being arrested, and I wanted to play a little bit of it for you guys to just so I could explain to you guys why I think that they're probably even dumber than the January 6th rioters.
But first, we start with the developing news this morning out of Brazil, where yesterday thousands of supporters of the nation's former president, Jair Bolsonaro, breached multiple government buildings. Video shows the moments rioters stormed Brazil's presidential office building, the nation's Congress, and Supreme Court in the capital of Brasilia. The chaos comes 1 week after.
Can I just say, by the way, Brazil's capital being Brasilia is some Looney Tunes nonsense.
The inauguration of President Lula da Silva, but falling on a day where there was no official proceeding taking place. The presidential election had already been certified, and neither the nation's Congress nor its Supreme Court were in session at the time of the riots. By 5 p.m. yesterday, riot police and security were able to retake the Supreme Court, and the presidential palace was retaken about an hour later. The Washington Post reports a visibly angered Lula addressed the nation yesterday evening, condemning the invaders as fascists and blamed Bolsonaro for encouraging the attacks by repeatedly questioning the integrity of the electoral process.
Okay, so they're about to go into comparing what happened on January 6th to what happened here in Brazil. And I have to say that our crazies are better at combating the government than Brazil's crazies. And I do think there's some differences between January 6th and what happened here that need to be emphasized. Because I made it a tweet while it was happening, and I was, you know, of course, I thought it was bad. I was saying all these things. But I also said that, well, at least the United States will not be alone now in its national embarrassment over January 6th. But I do think there might be a reason for Brazilians to maybe be slightly more embarrassed of the intelligence of the people who did this, and considering how far they got, and the people who did this should be even more embarrassed. But of course, they have maybe a little bit more pride in a faster governmental response. Who knows? But the reason why I think these people are stupider than the January 6th people is that on January 6th, there was a certification process. January 6th, the reason why the Stop the Steal rally organized by Ali Alexander, fan of Kanye West's presidential run, by the way, person who says he's going to expose Marjorie Taylor Greene for committing crimes.
Occurred is occurred.
Hey.
Cashamancer has donated $20. Helping Dylan be top G taking on the Matrix, or Chipotle Fund. Whatever comes first.
Obviously, I need to take down the Matrix by eating Chipotle. Thank you for the $20. I greatly appreciate it. This will go into my amazing Top G fund to help pay bail for Top G. Thank you for the $20. I lost my... oh, yes. So, January 6th, the certification process was going for President Joe Biden. And so, Ali Alexander, the organizer of the Stop the Steal rally, organized the Stop the Steal rally for January 6th and had Mo Brooks and all these other people like Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump speak because they wanted to stop the steal, quote unquote. Stop the imaginary steal, but stop the steal by trying to push Vice President at the time, Mike Pence, to stop the certification of the vote, because they believed, based on faulty legal logic, by the way, that if they could pressure Mike Pence to stop the certification, then they could keep Donald Trump in power enough time to basically keep him president. That was the idea. And you want to know what? It was a risky plan, obviously. It didn't work, but it did actually stop the certification process for a few hours. They invaded Congress while there was congressmen in there. Senators like Mitt Romney's and others had very close calls where they almost interacted with the people who were going in there, who were yelling at times like, oh, let's find Nancy, let's get these people, and breaking into offices, and were very clearly extremely violent. There's a reason why multiple people died that day. And so they were able to at least stop the certification process for Joe Biden. And I mean, I guess that's something. They really in the long term accomplished nothing but tarnishing the image of Donald Trump and scaring everybody and you know, bringing America into kind of like an international humiliating state. But they accomplished at least the slowing down of the process, and the day they chose to do this was at least strategic. I don't think everybody involved exactly planned to storm the Capitol, but it was a smart day strategically, cynically, to pressure the government to stop the process since they were certifying that day. But this was January 8th. Not only is it a bootleg January 6th because it's not on January 6th and January 8th, but the Supreme Court wasn't in. Congress wasn't in. There was nothing happening on January 8th in Brazil. There was no big like, oh, Lula da Silva is getting put in power today. Oh, we're certifying the election today. None of that was happening. In fact, Lula da Silva was already inaugurated a week before they did this. So it was already over. Everybody knew it was already over. Like Lula da Silva was talking about who was going to be in his like committees and his assignment positions and boards and all this other stuff. And he's talking about his agenda and what he's going to do now as leader of Brazil. Like, they're late. They're just late to the party. I don't know why they're doing it now. It's over. So why did they choose this day? Why would they storm the Congress and do all this on this day? Just to make a statement? What's the statement? That, hey, watch as 400 of us get arrested and we embarrass ourselves? Hey, look, we can be violent too. Yes, we support Bolsonaro because he's the law and order guy who's going to be tough on crime. So we're going to prove how law and order we are, just like the J6 rioters did, by attacking police, smashing windows, and storming the Congress when we don't get our way, in bounds with the law. So those right there are the major differences between January 6th and what happened here, where the J6 rioters, the people who were actually like coordinating, okay, let's get past this police line, the people who were the actual instigators and the ones who entered the Capitol, they were there on a smarter day, and they were actually, you know, going in there while something was happening. They were able to slow down the process. This is just like, I don't know, it's Sunday, I'm angry, Bolsonaro should be president, storm the Capitol. Like, what? But you have no leverage. There's no one there. The only leverage you have is that you hold the building. You don't hold any of the lawmakers. You don't have any of them hostage. You can't force them to do everything because all the lawmakers are at their home, like sleeping with their family, watching you riot and get beat up and have tear gas sprayed on you by police. They're watching your ass get beaten on a plasma when you wanted to hold them to account for the election you lost fairly. Now, those are the main differences I want to point out, where I think for the Brazilian country, they might be able to say, hey, we were able to contain this more. It didn't spiral more out of control than it was on January 6th. But the people involved were dumber than the J6 people. Just poor coordination, poor planning, accomplished literally nothing. Now let's let MSNBC, the liberal deep state media, talk about the similarities between these two events.
The region's governor says more than 400 of the rioters have already been arrested. Video shows those detained being loaded into buses and driven away by police. So you notice some similarities?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the similarities in the riots in Brazil and the January 6th attacks.
Yeah, not a coincidence.
They're just not a coincidence.
Not at all. Throughout his campaign, Bolsonaro pushed misinformation about election security to his supporters. He repeatedly claimed that Brazil's electronic voting machines were prone to fraud.
Where did he get that from?
No evidence to support his unfounded claims.
Where did he get that from?
The strategy mirrors what
Dude, he's so sassy. I don't know. Like, I've seen this guy before on these shows, but he's so sassy. My goodness.
Donald Trump and his allies did following the 2020 election. Some of Trump's allies were also involved in spreading lies about the election in Brazil and have been advising Bolsonaro and his son. Bolsonaro's son, Eduardo, who is a congressman in Brazil and was in Washington during the January 6th attack on the Capitol, met with Trump at Mar-a-Lago after his father lost October's election. The Washington Post reported he was also strategizing with Steve Bannon and former Trump campaign spokesman Jason Miller. In late November, Eduardo Bolsonaro tweeted this video of Bannon speaking at CPAC Mexico.
Look in the streets of Brazil. Look at the great patriots in Brazil that at a lot of danger to themselves have come forward in the streets of Brazil. And quite frankly, as much as I love the Bolsonaros, and Eduardo I think is going to speak tomorrow, and there's no better man on this globe than Eduardo Bolsonaro or his father. In Brazil, it's gone beyond the Bolsonaros. This is the people saying, no, you didn't follow the Constitution. You use these machines, you use the judiciary to shut us down in the media, and we're not going to tolerate it. It's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. Same in the United States. You know, the people like Carrie Lake are not going to give up, and I use as a warning in the great fight that you guys have in front of you, both for the cultural issues, for the political issues, and the economic issues. Once they start taking and digitizing the elections, once they start going to machines where you can't get paper ballot, you don't have proof of ID, you take it away from the precincts and they start to centralize it in collection centers, that's all done for one reason. That's to consistently steal elections because they know they don't have the backing of the people.
Last night, Bannon posted on social media, quote, Lula stole the elections. Brazilians know this. He's been talking about Brazil for months, pushing conspiracies and calling for Bolsonaro and his supporters to not accept the results of the election.
We got to start in Brazil with the Bolsonaros and the fight for freedom and the fight for sovereignty. The criminal Lula, the international criminal Lula, the partner of the Chinese Communist Party, is on the cusp with the aid and assistance of the United States government and national security apparatus who brag about, you know, CIA going down there in the summer, warning the Bolsonaros.
All right, enough. We get the idea.
We get the point.
Trump's.
Okay. So, by the way, I think they very clearly established that Bolsonaro and his team were working with many of the same people in the United States who were instrumental in building the conspiracies that the election was stolen. Steve Bannon being one of them, Stephen Miller, all these other people. So I think that the connection there is pretty obvious because the people involved in America were also involved here. Some people are saying, hey, this isn't the first time Brazilians have stormed the Congress. True, but the themes of this storming are very Trumpian, are very election denial-y, as we saw in the United States, and the people directly involved in the process in America were directly voicing their support and even directly involving themselves in the election denialism in Brazil. Jair Bolsonaro himself repeated basically all of the same talking points that Donald Trump did when it came to the electronic voting machines and all these other issues. And that's not to say there's no issues in Brazil's elections, just like that's not to say that there's no issues in America's elections. But the amount of doubt cast on the integrity of the elections and whether these results are real or not, that is fucked. That is messed up because that's not justifiable. And we're going back to just where we were 2 years ago in the United States, leading up to January 6th and after January 6th. As we could see, it culminated in the storming of the Capitol. I do want to say that when we look at this, though, this got condemned rightly by all sides. It was condemned in a vicious speech by Lula da Silva, calling them fascists, going after them. It was also condemned by basically every major political party. And it was even condemned by Bolsonaro, even though Bolsonaro still is not saying that, oh, I rightfully lost and all of that. He still hasn't really admitted to that, but he, at the very least, is condemning the rioting. And so this riot accomplished nothing. It was done with no real, I would say, planning. It didn't even slow down the process. The process was already over. It would be like a soldier showing up to Berlin, like a neo-Nazi sympathizer showing up to Berlin in 1946 to help the Axis. It's like, well, you're a little late, buddy. There's not really anything you can do. Not to say that Bolsonaro supporters are like Nazis, just to say that they're a little late to the party is all, right? I will say, though, that the funniest part about this is, let's say they actually held on to Congress. I think it would be quite difficult for Bolsonaro to, become president again or accept that power, because he's like in Florida right now, just wandering around local store. I don't know what he's doing over there. There he is. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong that he's wandering around these stores. It's just always weird to see him just going around just doing something, I don't know, somewhat normal. I don't think that he's really in a position right now to retake power, even though we all had these fears leading up to the election that if Bolsonaro lost, as he did, that, he would not do a coup, considering back in the 1990s, he said that a coup to bring back Brazil's military dictatorship was actually based in red pill, and it was a good thing, and that's a good idea, and Brazilians would thank me if I did that. A lot of people had rightful concerns, but I don't think, due to his condemnation and, him wandering around these stores, he's really in a position to do much of anything, really anything at all. I also do want to say, though, even though, they were rioting and they were hustling in there and trying to take over the government and, install Bolsonaro back in power, not everybody was hustling to overthrow democracy. Some were hustling to get a quick buck. During that storming of the Congress, there was a cotton candy salesman wandering around the rioters and the people storming the Supreme Court, the presidential palace, and the Congress, and he was selling cotton candy. And as somebody who lives, in D.C., around the D.C. area, not in D.C., I live in Maryland, but I live in the DMV, and has gone to D.C. on many occasions and see the people hustling to get out water bottles, hustling to sell out of food trucks, and they go everywhere and anywhere to hustle. I remember on January 6th, I bought a scarf as I was walking up to the Capitol building to watch people storm it. Right? When I was during the Millie MAGA March, I saw people selling Biden gear, BLM gear, and Trump gear. They didn't care. They were a nonpartisan moneymaker. And I'm happy to see that hustle culture extends internationally into Brazil as well, as this guy was showing that the hustle never dies, man. The hustle never dies. Never stop the grind. Amen. Amen. Never stop the grind. Dude, that's funny though. That stuff's hilarious. Really, really. My goodness. I think next we might want to do... Oh, one last thing. I almost forgot this. Right after all this happened, Bolsonaro was hospitalized for discomfort in his abdomen. Let's listen to that quick.
This hour, the former president of Brazil has been admitted to the hospital for abdominal pain, according to his wife. It comes as here in Washington. You've got the vice president, Kamala Harris, in just about 35 minutes or so, expected to swear in the new U.S. ambassador to Brazil any minute. All eyes on what, if anything, she says about the violent and extraordinary attack on the Brazilian government and how the administration plans to respond. In Brazil, you've got the capital now occupied by federal forces. A regional governor suspended, hundreds of people arrested after what you see on your screen here.
Oh, I'm completely muted. If I can just say one last thing, because putting this Bolsonaro being like hospitalized business for like a abdominal discomfort, because it's like, okay, abdominal discomfort, who cares, right? I mean, he'll most likely be fine. It probably will be nothing. The the argument I heard from Steve Bannon of like the CIA went down there to make it clear that they wouldn't be okay with the people's da-da-da-da-da. What the CIA representatives went down there and said is that they would not support a undemocratic overthrow of Brazil's government. Do you know how unbelievably hilarious it is that the one time I hear Steve Bannon getting angry about the CIA, not saying he hasn't, but the one time I hear him, it's him complaining that the CIA isn't supporting a coup in South America. That the CIA isn't getting out of its way to overthrow democracy in Latin America. Absolutely hilarious. Hey, Reboot Computer, thank you for the tier 1 and being sub for 17 months. Damn. Reboot Computer, OG into channel. They've donated, I don't know how much money through subs and donations. Huge support of the channel. Lula arresting peeps and investigating cops. Love it. Look, I obviously feel very similar to these people as I did the J6 people. These are people who have been misled. And I think the main culprit is not only the people who stormed the Capitol, but also the people who pumped their head with the misinformation that led to them thinking that their democracy was dead and they had no other option but to do what they're doing right now. And so again, this isn't just going to be stopped by keep arresting the people who stormed the Capitol. It can only be stopped once we properly push back upon the misinformation spread by far-right demagogues every time they lose an election.